Hi, this is Mark Bondman. In today's example, we're going to cover shared technical services and client compute. These are two common patterns that we see, and this is to show you how CSDM supports these patterns. In the first example, we're going to look at the shared technical service, in this case, LDAP. I'm going to build this out where we're going to show how a business application is connected to the application service. In this case, there's two of them are articulated. We've got an application service for MS Active Directory, one that's actually out in Azure. It's cloud hosted, and the other instance is in our own data center. And it's in our data center, and we have the dependency down into the underlying applications and also the hardware down here, the infrastructure here. So we have visibility of that hardware. So in this case, we have two different deployments of that particular application. Now, when we look at the technical services related to this, we kind of have two different versions of that. We have one down here, which is really the hosting service. Of course, that's the underpinning hosting for the infrastructure layer that the LDAP services are dependent on. The applications are running on that. And in this case, we're using the CMDB query. There's a dynamic CA group here established that uses that CMDB query to identify all of the applications and all of the servers that are associated to those technical services. The reason that you want to use those CI groups, dynamic CI groups, is that you have to accommodate those infrastructure pieces coming into the environment or out of the environment as appropriate. What we've identified is that this is a very dynamic layer, and as infrastructure becomes more ephemeral and dynamic, in containers, we want to make sure that the offering elements is all automated through this query mechanism. So make sure that you look at the dynamic CI groups and the CMDB queries in order to define what is contained and what those different offerings. So in this one, we also have the offering for the technical service of Active Directory production, pointing to the application service, which is the overall structure for these underlying applications. So this is accountable from a mapping point of view to understand how all of these applications and servers are integrated. And if you're using service mapping, you'll have additional layers of the network gear, for example, and if you have multiple instances across multiple data centers, that would be depicted here as well. So on the technology service definition, we have the identity management as the technology services, and that's where you might have multiple offerings. In this case, we have the two offerings, which is the Azure hosted cloud instance, and then this is the on-premise instance, and those are two different opportunities. If your organization is deploying Azure-based applications, but you need Active Directory, you can still implement that from an Active Directory point of view in the Azure cloud. And there may be dependencies between these two application service instances, so that maybe the one is the master source for all of the identities, and the cloud instance is receiving that information. And your application that is running is really there to manage and to account for both from an investment and strategy and planning point of view. So one thing I always teach my customers is that your business applications need to cover the business applications that are running, even if they aren't facing the business. So these need investment. There's governance activities. There's owners of these applications that need to keep them updated and account for them. So IT is part of the business, and you have your own special needs and applications as well. Now, as we build this out, what we're looking at is the business capability. This would be part of the IT capabilities within the organization, and the IT capabilities would be one of the business capabilities that you have. And underneath that business capability of IT, you may have the directory service management as one of the key capabilities that IT is responsible for. So keep that in mind. And then we also have situations where the Active Directory systems may actually send information to other systems within your environment. Or this could be also a depends on and going the other way. So there's two ways of doing that. Sends data is one, and then dependencies is the other. I would say depends on is pretty common, and when you're dealing with the situation of Active Directory or some of these particular shared services going down, there's a ripple effect to all of those things that depend on it. In some cases, it's just a pure data send. In some cases, it's a dependency. So that's something to keep in mind. And you may have other business applications, of course, that are different directory systems, and that would be established as different business applications with different instances that may have dependencies or data integrations as appropriate. The one thing I also wanted to highlight is that technology service and the offering should also be exposed into a catalog. I didn't depict it on this example. It really depends on your maturity, but in the CSDM overall structure, we have the ability to look at how those are integrated. So when you think about the catalog request, if the application service here was LDAP, you would be able to provide that offering in a catalog and then onboard new technology consumers, maybe that are building new applications and need to request access to LDAP. Maybe a credential needs to be issued, an approval process that they have to go through for audit purposes, or even a certificate that might need to be issued in order to allow that code to be signed and be able to access that LDAP instance as a technology service. So think about those processes too, and look at leveraging that request catalog for these technology services. This is important. The next example that we're going to get into is the client compute hardware use case. And in this case, we're going to be able to establish what the service owner is responsible for and some considerations, especially in global organizations where the client compute needs to be managed in different locales, different time zones. And so we're introducing the location hierarchy here in a very simple form to indicate that worldwide you may have two locations that you're managing, maybe one in US, one in EMEA. So, and the consumers, of course, could be in either or of those locations. So think about that in terms of the use case. And as we look at to branch that out, we're introducing also the product models and the companies that provide those product models. The product model, by the way, will be featured much more heavily as we go forward. And a little known fact is every CI type has a pointer, has a reference to a product model. It's not always used, but one of the things that we're going to be introducing and ensuring customers have is that reference to those product models going forward. As we get into this example, you'll see how that's going to be of value. We're also introducing the offerings here, and they're in red. The reason they're in red, some folks would consider client compute as a technical service. However, I'm using green. Green is our business service color, okay? So in this area, we tend to get a little bit blurry in terms of whether this is actually a technology service or a business service. And the rule of thumb that I like to use is it's a business service if you have subscribers, okay? If you can identify your consumer as a person or a BU or a specific location as a subscriber. And what happens is that you can identify and track each of the orders, the interaction with that consumer, and establish those subscriptions as such. So in this example, I did want to point that out because some folks would consider this technology services, but in this case, we're treating it like a business service. We're also introducing and making sure that we have dynamic CI groups established. These CI groups are there to understand the different offerings and what you might have as different, I would say, SLAs, OLAs associated with these offerings. And as an example, for desktops in your organization, so if somebody has a desktop, likely the desktop group is going to be physically located where the users are, so they have access to those. Whereas laptops may be all remotely managed. but you may still have different support teams around the globe in order to kind of follow the sun from a support perspective. So this is something to keep in mind, and this is one of the tools you have in order to define different offerings that are aligned to the different consumers that you have. So keep that in mind. You might want to create a different offering for different clients depending on where they are and your support model. So here we're going to also show you that the service owner owns this service, and this is part of your client services for your portfolio. And in this case, we have a business service of client compute. This is, again, where we get into a little bit of a gray area between technology and business service, but your business depends on their client compute. So from a reporting and a business management point of view, we are treating it as a business service. As we continue to flesh this out, we also want to introduce the product catalog to make sure that that's being used as appropriate here. This is pretty common where you do have a catalog that employees can go and self-service and or order new laptops or devices that are related to their laptops, or get help, right, through that support system. So the catalog is really where you want to expose what those offerings are. And this is also where you establish a linkage to the different product models that are available. So if I want a mobile compute versus a desktop compute device, I can go through that catalog and order one. And that's where the product models from various companies can be introduced and associated to those catalog items from a consumer point of view. You can see what's available. And when those items are actually ordered, you have now the CIs, the infrastructure CIs that are there. This is under the hardware. This would be, subclassed into a client or compute sort of class, whatever that hardware classification happens to be under the CI classes. But you would account for it here after it's ordered. And this is also starting to get into sort of the asset management use cases, because once you order the item, you're basically tracking that asset as it's assigned to the individual user. And so the infrastructure would have a reference back to the asset, which also has the owner, the person that owns that asset. And just another kind of a way of looking at this too is that your subscribers of your particular service kind of fall into the asset owners. And so there's a bit of a correlation between the subscriber aspect and asset assignment aspect that is typically seen on the infrastructure. Now, I will say that if you have both areas matured, so you have business services that are very mature and asset management that's very mature, this would be basically a synergy that you can implement. So your subscribers and your asset owners could be the same. So that way you're able to notify all of your subscribers from a service management point of view, but also account for the assets as they come and go and they get assigned. So the other thing to keep in mind is that the SLA for your EMEA clients and the US clients will be different. They will have different connotations in terms of if that consumer, for example, happens to travel from the US to EMEA. We've set up these dynamic CA groups in order to associate the desktop support for that particular locale. So if you were able to gather that information through SCCM, get the geolocation for that particular laptop, it can move between those different groups dynamically because they are moving around the globe, and whatever their support group will change depending on where they physically are. So this is kind of a powerful thing. So when they do come in for service, or they are subject to some sort of an outage that might affect them, let's say the Active Directory for that region is going down, you can notify those folks as appropriately. So something to keep in mind. We want to start leveraging this location information not only for the support groups and things like that, but for where those users happen to actually be if they do travel around the globe and they are now in a different support group as a result. Thank you very much for listening. These are two more example models that we have, and we'll be continuously updating this example series with more examples as we create them or hear from you on examples that you would like to see. Thank you.